Hey guys, so I'll be doing this suggestion here from Zephyr Xavier. It's a little late tonight, so it might seem a little slow, but let's see if I can pump this out. Um, so I've kind of covered this before, looser drawings, but let me just walk through the steps. Um, so there's a few ways you can pull this. One is to use, different colors that are light. Let me just find better tools. Blues. Use colors that are very light and hard to see. I've come to like peach. These are really my two go-to colors. It's kind of a peach orange and this kind of light blue. They kind of mix together and they look nice. So yeah, these two kind of colors work for me, and I have a few tools here that I use to draw lighter. So I'll just show it to you guys what they look like. So we got this sort of watercolory thing. It's just flat and paint's pretty light. Here's a lighter version of the same thing. Alright, here's another version of the same idea, although this one's a little darker. It's a lot more streaky. I got a really light airbrush. I got this one here that kind of blends together, and these are kind of just basically. There's probably this one too I use. I mean, they're all really come down to the same idea, which is to draw things without being able to really specify. So one thing I like to do is I like to zoom in. And get reduced to detail amount, and then you just kind of make the brush as big as as the head it should be, and then you draw the rest with that, or at least as big as so that you're not not overdoing anything. You're not putting more detail anywhere that it needs to go, so and like these are little blobs. The point of these is always that you want to try to sell as much as possible with the least amount of work. So let's say I have to draw a person lying down. You can draw like 6 or 7 of these. You can look at some reference material. You can just keep pounding these out really quickly. You don't. I'm not really following any rules here either. I have an idea of anatomical sizes and stuff, so that helps, but I don't have like a preset way. I'm just kind of going with whatever works. And you can just keep kind of doing this. And then you just, as long as your brush is blurry, I'm just going to use another one just to, so here's a more flat airbrushy one. You can just do the same idea. Sometimes one brush will make you work for you. Sometimes another one will work for you. So then, like I said, you just get the brush to be able to block in the head in the simple stroke. If it's big enough to block in the head like this, then it's big enough to take care of the rest of your needs. Sometimes I like using a little strokey tool like this, because it kind of like, you can just kind of block in shapes. This is the kind of high level stuff you have to start worrying about once you want to really kind of get your flow better. This is the stuff that animation people think about, which is how to, once you get to a certain level, you can just pretty much make a drawing out of any shape, and then you're asking yourself what's the best core shape. So here I've built 3 shapes, and I could just go in and, let's say I don't know what to do. I could just be like, okay, how do I fill these shapes in that I think look good? So here I got this one. I'm gonna have a smaller brush this time, and instead of I'm doing it kind of like a 2-prong blocking system. So I got 2 sitting people. I'm not really thinking too much. It's actually easier to not think too much when I'm doing these tutorials. I'm actually not as talented when I'm not doing these tutorials because I tend to overthink things. But here, because there's a recording process, and I kind of really have to show what I'm talking about, and just things kind of come out a little easier. So one of those weird things. You guys see me just take 3 simple shapes and just see what fits in those shapes. They're like, my idea was just generally I wanted someone sitting down. There's more to it than this, of course. Once you got these shapes, you got to work them into nice drawings. But really, it comes down to just keeping things nice and blurry. For me, to the point that sometimes I'll come over. I found that erasing is actually detrimental. I used to erase all the time when I sketched, but I actually think the best scenario is to just blur. So if you can make yourself a little bit of a blur tool, and you're like, oh, look here, I'll show you a good example of this. So you're refining a head and stuff, and you're like, okay, cool. Let me see if I can fake up a situation that I'm trying to, okay. So you're like, come to a point where you kind of start struggling. Everything else seems okay, and then this part seems to, and then you erase, and then you draw, and you erase, and you draw. I find that when you, instead of erasing, you just kind of blur up the spot you're having trouble with. Maybe if it gets too dark, you kind of erase a bit of it very softly with a really soft eraser. I find that the shape you want is there somehow. But if you keep erasing and redrawing, you keep erasing and redrawing the same bad drawing. But I find that if you blur, you give your mind some time to like refresh. So just think about that. Give that a go. I think that might help some of you. Of course, art is subjective to many people, so it might not help all of you. But see, I'm gonna erase and try drawing what I want. But if I keep having that problem, I'm just gonna go blur it and then maybe get back to really sketch mode. And sometimes I find you gotta go back and forth between really unprecise to get those shapes to work. Obviously at this point it's because this leg's too not long enough. Now that I'm back to blur mode, I can blur this again, and I can just go back to refining this thing and getting it where I want it to be. So a lot of it's like that. You gotta keep things really nice. And another thing that helps is to make sure your stylus isn't too, like, make sure you're mapping it to a larger space, or have a large making sure you're mapping your tablet to not, if your tablet's too big, I have 2 or 3 styluses that register differently. If it's too big, you're always going to draw, your whole arm needs to be able to really hit a lot of ground. So if like from here to here on my tablet, that's about the size of a playing card, the length of a playing card. So sometimes you got to change your mapping settings so that Here, I'll show you what it looks like. Here we got the mapping. And if I use portion, you'll see it's taking a little bit of the whole thing. This is for one of my brushes. Other ones have bigger areas, but one of my styluses is a very small area. And this allows my cursor to have a lot of movement with very little hand movement. And due to that, that also helps me because instead of being like, here, I'll show you the difference if I use the really, really small range one. If I have, where is it? If I have this one here, you know, my movement's really limited. I gotta go like across a lot of space. Now, this is fine for precision, but in this case, it's not what I really want. I want to be able to move really fast. So, and you're not really looking for precision at this point. You're just looking to get those damn lines out. You get a good flow out there. So keep an eye out for that too. Like, don't let your tools limit you. When you're on traditional, you can just kind of draw small and that'll solve that problem. I got 2 legs, sets of legs. At this point, all I'm doing is trying to identify whatever drawing I think I made. You know, at the time I wasn't too sure what I was doing, but now that that's another thing that helps as well, is you kind of do a drawing or two, you do a bunch of them, and then you come back to them, and then that helps you give it with some fresh eyes. It's surprisingly shocking how the benefit of just kind of walking away from your drawing can have on what you're doing. So, you know, a lot of the times, you know, you have a good idea of what the drawing is you want once you've come back to it, because you'll see the illustration in the mess. Whereas when you're trying to puzzle it out if you try to puzzle it all out with your hammering down over and over on the drawing and trying to redraw this and redraw that, you know, I mean, it's a philosophy. Sometimes you really want that one pose and that one idea, but in my opinion, you have a lot better ideas in your subconscious than you do in your conscious mind, and tapping your subconscious mind is really a good benefit. So being able to gain access to that is really a boon, because it's a lot less effort if you can just pull it out of the ether instead of thinking and stressing over art, which, believe you me, I've stressed a lot over art. It's not always, I'd say it's been fun about 10% of the time in the past. It's a lot more fun now, but I needed to really kind of change some of the ways I looked at what I was doing. Change some of the ways of how I was doing things to really get it where I wanted it. And it's weird to think that attitude can really affect what you're doing. Because a good attitude or a different attitude, I'm not saying good, that's wrong. Different attitudes can really change how you're approaching this and can give you the results you want with less effort. You know, so here's pretty much it. I mean, you guys just saw me do it. I took these blurs, you know, and I don't particularly feel attached to any, like, I don't feel like if I lost this file, I know I can just do this again over and over again. So, you know, you can blur it up. Once you've got it where you like, you blur it up, find a tool that blurs. There's many ways to do that, and you can just work it some more. You're like, okay, well, I like what most of this was, but, you know, here's time to really get some more detail in there. So now that what I feel was a good amount of detail is in there, I can actually start building up more, you know, and you can just keep evolving this process and refining it more and more, adding more shapes, adding more volume as you keep exploring what you're doing. You know, now that I've got enough volume here, I can see, oh, you know, need a little more here. A bit of my expertise takes, oh, here, I need to blur this. I'm struggling too much. Whenever you're struggling too much, you gotta learn you gotta learn to come back and just, instead of fighting it, you just kind of like, oh, you know, you're like, I think most of it's there, but if you keep erasing and redrawing, you're just getting into that cycle. So in this case, I got more of what I want without having to fight as much, because I knew it wasn't right, but I knew I wasn't far off either. So if I just blurred it, I could get a lot closer to what I wanted instead of, because here's the thing, what happens is when you erase, you automatically make the assumption that the place you erase is where you should draw again. Like you're already filling your mind with the wrong kind of conclusion, which is, well, the eyes are wrong, so I'm going to erase where the eyes are and draw eyes back in the spot that I felt were wrong. But like, if you blur that, you give your mind an opportunity to reinterpret the drawing. If you just erase it and leave all the major features, then you're just going to draw them right back where they were, because you've got everything that around it still sitting where it was, and you're just kind of redo the whole thing. It's hard to deprogram yourself from doing that. You know, like you guys know, I'm not you guys know I'm not the best artist in the world, but you know, I feel like this is some good advice for you guys. If you're a beginner and you feel your art's too stiff, you just gotta start. You can't start from lines. I don't think it's good. You gotta find the ways you find most comfortable for simplifying things too. Like, you know, until recently, I always had a hard time with legs, a certain part of the legs. But as soon as I discovered that if you draw this shape, this gets me out of my leg problem most of the times, which is circle, line, and then one of these. And then once I do that, I get everything I need from a leg almost instantly. You know, it's not perfect, but I'm not fighting it anymore. And you got to find your shortcuts like that. You got to find out what you need to be able to get those results. Same thing for staggered legs. You know, learning that if you want to draw good side viewed legs, you got to make sure that you kind of stagger the bottom part. Because truth is, legs kind of look like this, and that's because the shin bone sits right underneath the core of the body, and this whole hip area goes forward, you know. But to get that good shape, sometimes you gotta like really force the appearance. So here you saw what I did was I drew the one shape, and then I drew another one staggered completely, and that's how I got that. So, and then I knew that I had to kind of work those two shapes together, and then I get the structure I need. So it's one of those things. It's just you got to get your little tools. You got to get your comfort. You got to figure out how you're going to break down your shapes. Sometimes you need good consistent volumes, sometimes you don't. You know, I don't like drawing little robot characters every time I draw. Sometimes I just want to get nice. I want to get it on the first go and not have to break down. But sometimes it's like you're not on the ball, and you just need to kind of break things down into shapes. And then once you do that, you get everything you want. So you can't be too hard on yourself sometimes that you're not where you need to be. Sometimes you're going to be good, and sometimes you're going to be less good, and it sucks, but that's just the way it is. All right, hopefully that helps a little bit, and gives you an idea of what I do. I mean, I was just kind of refining and doodling and not really thinking too hard, but I feel I've given you guys a few ways to approach this. Mostly start as blotchy as possible. Use large brushes about the size of the head. Get a bunch of drawings and refresh your eyes. Come back to it a bit later. So do a bunch of sketches and start back to the start and get a brand new look at them. Don't erase, kind of blur or smudge what you're doing so that you can kind of re-explore what you're doing. Break down your shapes if you really need to get even more geometric if it really helps. Sometimes, find little tools and tricks to kind of break down those shapes as quickly as possible without really committing to anything. That's one of those things that's really helped me a lot, is not really drawing 3D shapes, but as much as finding ways to set a true shape. I don't know if that makes sense, but to seek out my volumes without having to really draw volumes. It's hard to explain, but it's just I'm just trying to ensure that, like here, for instance, I can tell that if I add just a little bit like this here, this head now has a lot more volume to it because it has like the back of it to it. And all it was adding a little thing at the back of a sphere. And this is just something that comes with experience. Here's another. If I change the shape to this, I now feel like it's a more head-based. And I mean, it's like literally the same thing. It's just dips down like this. And it helps you give an idea of which way the faces are heading. So little tips like that. And a lot of these are things you just gotta learn on your own. So hopefully that helps you guys, and that gives you a good way to go. There's a bunch of ways to do that. Maybe there's a bunch of ways to really kind of find poses and stuff all over the internet. I think the most simple one is the one I showed you. If you really can't think of anything to draw, you make a game out of it. You're like, here's a shape, here's a shape, here's a shape, here's a shape, and then you just kind of go like, okay, how do I stick a character into this? How do I get a character to fit in this nonsense? And sometimes it might like hurt what you're doing. Don't go overboard, but if you're flexible enough, you can find ways to kind of fit that. If you've got an idea of what the character should be doing, so let's say they should be reading a book, Karen, it gets a lot easier. So for instance, let's say like I need a character that's reading a book. And then I can just go, okay, well, here's this character there, down here. And here's the book. They're on the side of the bed. Here's another one. And they're just kind of kneeling down. And everything's kind of very blurry, because I don't really want to commit to anything right now. I want to get shapes and ideas. Maybe they're too close to the thing or whatever. Here it is again. Another one. Maybe they can be really into the book. Maybe huddled with their knees up. And they're just kind of crouching. You know, and then you come in and you just give that a blur. So, like, for instance, in this case, you saw as soon as I had kind of a concept or theme, things got a lot easier. So if you're trying to draw something, and if you can think of, if you get a shape down and an action, you can kind of carry the rest of it. You can carry the rest of it all the way through. So let's get that head smaller. You know, you can get all the stuff you need out of it. You can see which drawings really work for you best as well, which seem to express what you want the most. So here, you know, I'm still staying kind of blurry, but it's mostly because I'm not 100% on the drawings yet. So here, I think this one will work a little better, so I'm going to refine it a little more. Here, I want to give stronger appearance. So here I want the head to look more like it's looking down, so I got to draw more of the top of the head and drop it over past the shoulders a lot more. And this drawing here is just weak as hell, and I kind of don't like it, so I'm not going to try to save it. I'm just going to erase it because it's not worth my time. So there it is. I mean, that's pretty much the best I can give you guys if you don't know what you're doing or you're trying to simplify stuff. That's usually what I kind of go through. So hope that helps those out there trying to figure out what to do with all that. Sorry this took a million years to talk about. You know, it's almost 30 minutes, but there it is. Hope it helps you guys. See ya.